Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
Nothing is off the table.
BC's Premier says the province will back retaliatory tariffs in the face of Donald Trump's threats, but he's leaving border security to Ottawa. Plus,
I don't know why they would do this.
People in Nanaimo are shaking their heads after police say someone went on a vandalism spree, smashing dozens of vehicles. And
the situation is dire. We have someone that has been out for well over 36 hours now in some really cold conditions.
Search and rescue teams from across BC worked to find a skier last seen at the top of a resort near Kamloops.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. BC's Premier says the province will support retaliatory tariffs in the face of threats from incoming U.S. President Donald Trump. But as Mira Baines explains, David Eby says securing the border is still up to the federal government.
BC's Premier is responding to threats made by U.S. President-elect Donald Trump on tariffs, a 25% increase on goods coming from Canada and Mexico unless both countries stop illegal migrants and fentanyl from crossing into the U.S.
Nothing is off the table. We are prepared to support retaliatory tariffs and a response to the United States that gets their attention to help them understand what the consequences would be for British Columbians and what the consequences would be for Americans of the president-elect proceeding in this direction.
Eby listed BC imports crucial to U.S. industry, including natural gas, electricity, and critical minerals. Alberta's Premier unveiled a plan to create a new border unit under the command of Alberta sheriffs, who she says will have the power to arrest people trying to cross illegally or traffic drugs or weapons.
Our goal is to have the interdiction patrol unit up and running by early next year. Together with federal law enforcement, we'll ensure that our section of the American border is well protected.
Eby says BC will not be doing the same.
To take over federal responsibilities at the federal border and pay for that when British Columbians are paying for so many other things that other provinces don't have to pay for feels a bit like a step too far.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford says he's willing to cut off Ontario's energy supply to the U.S. if Trump follows through on tariffs. The back and forth on border tariffs is putting people living in towns near the 49th parallel on edge over possible economic repercussions.
They come to our restaurants, they belong to our golf course. I mean, they just bring a lot of goodwill and resources to our economy. It's huge, and it's just cross-border camaraderie.
A Washington state lawyer points out issues of illegal crossing attempts and border security are under federal jurisdiction, so provinces have limited powers, and the numbers are small.
Well, your average person where I live in Blaine really doesn't think much about it on the northern border because there's such a small percentage. I think like 2,000 or 3,000 a year.
Still, the issue could escalate once Trump takes power on January 20th. Mira Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
BC, meanwhile, will boost tax incentives for the film industry to try to attract more productions to this province.
This is a sector that's taken some hits. The decision by major studios to draw down some of their budgets, to reduce some of their budgets on production, the impact of labor disruptions, other jurisdictions competing with British Columbia for these productions with significant subsidies for the industry means that we need to respond. We need to make sure that we continue to be competitive.
The government says the 2025 budget will include boosts to the Film Incentive BC tax credit. It supports Canadian content production, and increases to the production services tax credit. It incentivizes international projects being made here.
It's fantastic. We are so thrilled that they've been able to announce this before the holidays. We were all down in LA with the Screen BC mission, including government.
Creative BC says there were 26,000 jobs in the BC film and TV industry last year. That is down from 37,000 in 2022. Former Premier John Horgan was honoured in Canada's House of Commons earlier in the day. MPs held a moment of silence in his memory. Horgan died of cancer last month at the age of 65. A memorial service is scheduled for this Sunday at the Q Centre in Colwood, just outside Victoria. Those looking to pay their respects will need to reserve tickets. You can do so by visiting tickets.victoriashamrocks.com, or you can call BC's Office of Protocol. Vancouver City Council is looking at changes to its massive plan for the Broadway corridor. Those amendments would increase plan density and bring it in line with changes to limits on the heights of some buildings. But as Isaac Ponnet explains, some people are still worried.
Dozens of residents and advocates spoke at City Hall Wednesday about a series of proposed changes to Vancouver's plan for the Broadway stretch. City staff is recommending a revised plan that will see 41,500 new homes built over the next 30 years. That's up from the 30,000 originally set out. And the removal of height limits on some buildings along the corridor, which means buildings near new SkyTrain stations could reach up to 20 stories.
This is more height and density compared to what was originally envisaged in the Broadway plan. However, it does not necessarily mean that all of the villages will change.
City officials say the new plan would help the city align with provincial legislation requiring density near transit hubs and would see thousands of rental units built. But one urban planner worries more density is not going to solve Vancouver's affordability challenges and will instead mean existing homes are built over.
So if adding new housing supply was going to lead to lower prices, Vancouver should have the lowest home prices in North America. Unfortunately, it has the highest. So it undercuts the idea that the affordability will be improved by adding new housing.
He's one of 22 architects and planners who wrote an open letter asking the city to rethink the Broadway plan and to pause and consider these changes.
And I think everybody that's on that list understands that if you're going to build a subway, probably a good idea to, over time, add density. The point is that density should be affordable, and it doesn't have to be towers to do that.
Well, I mean, people like their neighborhood the way it is. That's why they live there.
Wong says he understands why people are concerned about tall towers being built in their neighborhood, but the city needs more homes.
Vancouver is surrounded by ocean as well as by mountains. We just don't have that much land. So, the only way we can add more housing is to build up.
The plan, which is set to accommodate 64,000 people, will shape how Broadway looks over the next 30 years. Isaac Ponnet, CBC News, Vancouver.
The Mowitchit-Muchelit First Nation has filed a title claim in BC Supreme Court, seeking Aboriginal title for their ancestral lands on the west coast of Vancouver Island. The nation says the title claim aims to take back decision-making control on land and resource issues. It's also asking for money for the damage done by Crown-authorized forestry and fishing. The nation says that Yuquot was the place of initial contact between First Nations and Europeans in BC.
For over 200 years, most outsiders have considered Yuquot to be a historic subject of history. However, for us, it's certainly our livelihood.
The claim seeks title to land from Yuquot to Tassus in the north and Buttle Lake in the east. In Nanaimo, an overnight rash of vandalism has left more than 40 vehicles damaged across several neighborhoods. And as Claire Palmer shows us, it has some people shaking their heads.
As he cleans glass out of his floor mats, Keith Work has just one question. Why?
I wish people would have more consideration on other people's property. And, just it costs money. We don't need it. It's unnecessary, really.
Work says he noticed something funny about his rear window when he woke up on Wednesday morning. When he went to touch it, the back windshield exploded into his cab, truck bed, and onto him.
It's a big inconvenience because I had to miss today work, and then I'm worried about now I have to order glass, and that's taken 3 days, and it comes from Calgary, and it's a huge inconvenience.
Work lives in a quiet neighborhood on Jinglepot, just one of 8 neighborhoods RCMP say were targeted, with 42 vehicles affected. Harwell Road was the hardest hit by the vandalism spree, with 9 vehicles targeted.
Safety-wise, I feel fine, but disappointed. I wouldn't expect that sort of thing.
Boyd says he's lived in the neighborhood for 5 years, and while he wasn't affected, he was shocked to hear about it. RCMP say nothing was stolen, and they expect more vehicles to be affected as owners come forward in the coming days.
Looks like the vehicle was driving up or down the road. Then it continued into the parkades in downtown Nanaimo. They went north as far as Mary Ellen and on Jinglepot Road.
O'Brien adds that there was a similar spree in Ladysmith the same night. Mounties are still on the hunt for the perpetrators and would encourage anyone with information or who was affected to step forward. Claire Palmer, CBC News, Nanaimo.
Police in Nelson are asking for your help to find a missing woman. They say 35-year-old Nicole Boivin England was last seen in Nelson on December 8th at a hostel called the Dancing Bear Inn. She's said to be 5'6", 141 pounds with light brown hair and brown eyes. Police say she could be wearing a black puffy jacket, black toque, black leggings, and black running shoes. Mounties and search and rescue staff are intensifying efforts to find a skier last seen at the top of Sun Peaks Resort near Kamloops on Tuesday. As Tom Popock explains, crews have now been called in from around the province to search on the ground and from the air.
RCMP released this photo of Tomas Yahalkowski in a Sun Peaks lift line dressed in a red and black ski jacket and dark ski pants. The 68-year-old Maple Ridge engineer was reported missing on Wednesday.
He does not appear to have returned to his hotel room, nor has he been heard from since checking into that run on Tuesday. So we're very concerned for his well-being.
Located northeast of Kamloops, Sun Peaks started their season late November. The mountain just opened up new terrain in its massive West Bowl. This summer, constructing a new high-speed express quad chairlift, allowing easy access to groomed runs and potentially treacherous out-of-bounds backcountry. This season, 3 skiers have already been reported missing and found. Yahalkowski was last seen at the top of that bowl.
With that chairlift in that area, I would say there's potentially a bit of an allure.
Search and rescue crews from across the province have now been called in.
So we had Barrier, Vernon, and Shuswap join today as well. So we now have collectively, there's upwards of 20 search and rescue team members. And we are looking at both inbound and out of bound terrain.
The North Shore SARS Talon helicopter is adding airborne thermal and night vision imaging to an arsenal of snowmobiles, drones, and ski patrollers on the ground. Conditions were cold but clear when Yahalkowski disappeared, the weather remaining favorable for searchers. But for survival,
the situation is dire. We have someone that has been out for well over 36 hours now in some really cold conditions. I mean, it was only -3, but it was a very cold -3. So it's definitely concerning, and time is of the essence.
Officials are asking the public to keep an eye out for any sign of Yahalkowski on the mountain or off. Tom Popock, CBC News, Kelowna.
And our science and climate specialist Darius Madavi is here with our look at the weather and a storm moving in.
Yes, that's right. So we had a little bit of a weak frontal system move into the south coast today, spreading some showers. I was just outside and definitely saw some showers. But as we head into tomorrow, we're going to see a much stronger system come in. You can see that in the red here, that developing storm moving in off the south coast. So the south coast is going to take the brunt of this one, but also some precipitation breaking into the interior. And the central coast will get some fairly consistent rainfall over the next 36 hours or so as well. You can see that we've had a little bit of precipitation just earlier today, some showers down here and some the odd flurry up in the central interior, but really not much. This is, again, just a really weak front moving across BC. Tomorrow is when the excitement happens. There's no warnings in place for land across BC, but there is a marine storm warning off Vancouver Island, and there may be some warnings issued tomorrow because those winds are going to be particularly high. Of course, we're also watching out for the rain, especially high on the west coast of Vancouver Island, but those winds are more the concern. And if you tune in later in the hour, Dan, we'll be talking about this map, my favorite map, the Cloud Astronomy Forecast map, and you'll find out why later.
Very good. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
The 7th Invictus Games will kick off in Vancouver and Whistler in less than 2 months, organized in partnership with 4 host First Nations. 500 competitors from 23 countries will take part, including 3 new teams: Lithuania, Brazil, and Afghan Unconquered. That team includes Afghan refugees from across the globe. This year, the Games are trying to emphasize the role of sport in the recovery for veterans and service members.
The Games are about 2 things: healing and gratitude. Healing for the 532 participants from 23 countries who are all wounded, injured, and sick service members or veterans.
The Games kick off on February 8th at BC Place. Katy Perry will perform at the opening ceremony, joined by Noah Kahan and Nelly Furtado. Still to come, why are many Canadian infants still not getting RSV vaccines despite Health Canada guidelines. We'll tell you after. As winter settles over Cranbrook, the challenges facing people without homes there increase. And those numbers grow in the East Kootenays. The city is working hard to keep more people warm. As Corey Bullock explains, BC Housing says it's making progress on more permanent shelter plans.
How can we tackle homelessness? It's been a question Cranbrook City Council and BC Housing have been working to answer for years as homelessness in the East Kootenay City continues to rise. And while BC Housing says progress is being made on plans to open 2 shelters next year, one big barrier is just finding someone to run them.
I know this has been in the works for quite a long time. One of the constraints in our in getting new projects off the ground often is operator capacity.
He says crews are making progress on renovations to the building BC Housing purchased back in January of 2023. And the permanent year-round shelter with 40 beds is now slated to open in early summer next year. It will replace the current temporary shelter that opened during the pandemic. And the Crown Corporation says the goal is to eventually open more transitional housing too.
That's really what we've been looking to do in Cranbrook, is really provide
more supportive housing to really introduce flow into the shelter. We don't want to have people languish in the shelters, and we want to see them move into more permanent housing that gives them dignity and respect, and they pay rent.
According to BC Housing's 2023 homeless count, nearly a third of the homeless population in Cranbrook identify as seniors. And work is underway on a senior-specific facility, also set to open next year. In the meantime, an emergency cold weather shelter is set up at the Anglican Church in Cranbrook. The doors will only open during the evenings when temperatures hit -15. Corey Bullock, CBC News, Cranbrook.
Data shows most RSV infections this season have been rising among babies 1 year and under. A Health Canada-approved immunization has shown to drastically cut the risk of hospitalization. Mike Crawley looks at why that protection remains out of reach for many infants in this country.
Welcome to the RSV clinic.
A clinic to immunize babies against respiratory syncytial virus, or RSV.
Oh, love. Okay.
Some 3,000 Canadian children are hospitalized annually with lung infections resulting from RSV, most of them infants.
Those with more severe disease may have things like wheezing, some difficulty breathing. They may look distressed or incredibly tired.
Now there's a new shot against RSV, approved by Health Canada and recommended by the National Advisory Committee on Immunization for all infants.
I'm very grateful that he is protected and that it's covered by the government.
However, only Ontario, Quebec, and the 3 territories are offering it to all newborns. In the rest of the country, except for the highest risk babies, parents don't get the option.
I wish we had this as well, this opportunity to give her the injection so she would have that same protection as other babies in other areas in Canada.
Why the disparity? The other 8 provinces could not reach a pricing deal with the company that makes the RSV shot. Its Canadian list price is more than $950 per dose. One reason why the RSV shot costs that much? It's a monoclonal antibody. So unlike a vaccine, it protects against disease immediately.
That is particularly useful in the scenario of RSV, where we know that the risk is greatest during those first few months of life.
In a statement, drug maker Sanofi says it continues to work with all provinces and territories to facilitate access to the shot for all Canadian babies for 2025 and beyond. Data from Europe and the US suggests the shot reduces infant hospitalizations from RSV by more than 80%. Mike Crawley, CBC News, Toronto.
There is a look at the day that was in sunny, well, not this day, White Rock, where the grass is still very green, though, with only 13 days until Christmas. Many people on the South Coast may be wondering if it will be a white Christmas. Darius Madavi will weigh in with your BC-wide weather forecast coming up right after this. Time to dive into our vast CBC archives. As British Columbians get into the holiday spirit, we're taking a look back at a special Christmas tradition put on by the Canadian Coast Guard for kids living in remote coastal communities, featuring a very special guest. Have a look.
Every month, the Camsell, a supply and rescue ship from the Canadian Coast Guard, makes a run around Vancouver Island. It brings in supplies for the families who man the 28 lighthouse stations around the island. In December, the ship carries a very special passenger. As we all know, Santa Claus has a lot of work at this time of year, and it's quite handy for him to visit the children in these coastal stations. They are quite isolated, and the weather can often make it difficult later in the year. This year, the weather was just perfect as Santa made his way to the station on Entrance Island near Nanaimo. The Shangrenas family lives here year-round with their two boys, Daniel and Rod. For the children, this visit is something really special. After all, Santa comes just to see them and to give them some early gifts.
Merry Christmas, Rod.
Rod was pretty happy with his fireboat, but he still had a whole list of toys he gave Santa for Christmas. For the parents, away from the hustle-bustle of the cities, of the department stores, this personal visit makes it a grand occasion.
Nice to see all my friends up and down the coast.
I look forward all year to see Santa Claus, so when he comes, it's just the best day of my year. Here I get a personal visit, and it means so much to us.
But the best things do have to come to an end, and eventually Santa Claus does have to leave. After all, he has many other children to visit. Georges Tremel, CBC News, on Entrance Island.
So let's fast forward some 40 years. How does the Coast Guard Christmas tradition and traditions differ now? We're joined by Captain Jeffrey McDonald for that perspective. He works at the Prince Rupert Coast Guard Station, has been there for 6 years. Captain McDonald, first of all, thanks for joining us. For people who wonder, what is it like to spend Christmas and holidays on call watching over the water there?
Well, first of all, it's, as you can say, we're in a remote location, and we're just like every other day, 24/7, 365 days of the year. We're here to stand by for Canadians and mariners, and it's in that regards, it's just another work day. However, it is Christmas, so it's good to keep crew morale up with a really nice dinner and time to phone friends and family at home. And yeah, so I doubt it's much different than it was in the 80s. It's just today.
Yeah. And how many fellow Coast Guard members do you work with there?
We have a crew of 5 here in Prince Rupert.
And have you had any Christmas Day stories, adventures that stand out in your service in that time up there?
Oh, up here we've had a call, a couple of medical evacuation calls to our local First Nations communities, and that's always extremely important to us. So we're not the only ones on board. It's EHS, Emergency Health Services, will also be on board and give us a hand with those calls. I can tell you a story about working in Tofino and just sitting down for Christmas dinner and getting the pagers going off to go rescue a surfer in Cox Bay with 4-meter seas and dimming lights. Yeah, so there's been some interesting times in Christmas Day events for sure.
And if I can ask, what was that rescue like?
Well, it's always, when you're going to 4-meter seas at night, doing a search for somebody, it's exciting, it's riveting, and it all worked out very well.
That's great. Now, well, Rupert Station is near a major city. There are numerous more remote operations like search and rescue stations, as well as lighthouses. You mentioned Tofino. How does Christmas look like for those working more in those isolated communities?
I would say it's a real feeling of camaraderie when you're with a small group of people. So the Coast Guard family that I have here at work, we'll spend it together, and we will also invite EHS services to our Christmas dinner as well if they've got the time to come by. And it's a small family, just like any other family.
And may I ask if you have a personal family of your own, how have you adapted traditions with them when you're on the job?
Well, there's always a phone call at Christmas Day, and we get together to spend special times outside of Christmas. So, you know, as melancholy sometimes as one might feel on Christmas Day being away from family, knowing that you're doing good for the Canadians and Mariners out there standing by also warms my heart anyways, and my crew, and family understand that.
Captain Jeffrey McDonald at the Prince Rupert Coast Guard Station, we appreciate your time and your perspective. All the best. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you as well, and thank you for the interview.
Back to our top story now. Ottawa preparing to release details about its billion-dollar border plan in the coming days. Canada's premier's got an early heads up today during a call with the Prime Minister. Olivia Stefanovich has more as some provinces want a tougher approach with the U.S.
Canada is full of natural resources Americans may no longer be able to rely on. If Donald Trump moves forward with his threat to impose a 25% tax on all Canadian goods.
We power 1.5 million homes, and if they put on tariffs, it's going to be unaffordable for Americans to buy electricity.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford doubling down on a counter threat he made in last night's call between the premiers and the Prime Minister.
We're going to use every tool in our toolbox to defend Ontarians and Canadians across the border.
Well, that's okay if he does that, that's fine.
Critical minerals, metals, and forestry products may also become part of the retaliation strategy.
The U.S. is trying to build homes for Americans, but they need our 2x4s to do so.
But premiers are divided about how hard to punch back.
Under no circumstances will Alberta agree to cut off oil and gas exports.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says she prefers a diplomatic approach, and she's not alone.
We hope it is just bluster. We're preparing as if it is not. There will be no winners in a trade war.
I had the chance to meet with Mr. Trump last weekend in Paris, and he told me very clearly that we can avoid those tariffs if we do what needs to be done with the borders.
The U.S. president-elect wants Canada to stop the flow of fentanyl and illegal migrants crossing the border. The federal government shared details about its plan to address Trump's concerns, said by sources to cost more than $1 billion, during their call yesterday with premiers.
We were encouraged by their desire to contribute provincial personnel, provincial assets to this work.
Alberta released its own plan today to strengthen its border with Montana. Other provinces are expected to follow. As for the federal government's border strategy, well, the public safety minister says it will be released to the Trump administration in the coming days and the Canadian public. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Ottawa.
Now, Alberta, as we heard, it says it's putting $29 million into a new unit to patrol its border with Montana. It follows Trump's threat on those 25% tariffs. The CBC's Terry Reith has more.
Alberta is setting up a special unit comprised of provincial sheriffs who will be patrolling what they are calling a red zone north of the Canada-U.S. border in Alberta. Now, this unit will be comprised of 51 officers, all of them armed with carbines, which are short tactical rifles. They will also have 10 support staff and a team of drones and drug-sniffing dogs. Their job will be to look for drugs, human trafficking, and guns. Now, the timing of this is interesting given that Donald Trump only began musing about the Canada-U.S. border about 3 weeks ago, and today the government gave quite a detailed plan. The reason for this, says Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, is it has been in the works for quite some time now.
The reason we're able to get started, accelerate this plan, is because we've been working on it for 18 months. It's the reason why we already have a number of officers that have been trained. And we are going to be accelerating the acquisition of equipment. But this has been in the works for some time.
Now, the situation at the border between Montana and Alberta is nothing like the southern border or even of the Other crossings, particularly in Quebec and the lower mainland of British Columbia, figures show that all of 3 people crossed the border into Alberta from the U.S. last year, claiming refugee status. Going the other way, U.S. says about 100 people crossed from Canada into Montana. So, asked why the urgency about this, Public Safety Minister Mike Ellis says this.
In regards to a specific case regarding somebody walking across the border, I mean, I would only be speculating at that particular point. Our focus in this particular case has to do with the illegal guns, illegal drugs, and human trafficking is coming across the border.
A lot of the work will be sheriffs setting up at vehicle inspection points along that 2-kilometer red zone north of the border. They will be doing extra vehicle inspections, and this whole plan will cost Alberta taxpayers about $29 million. Terry Reith, CBC News, Edmonton.
Amid the tariff tussle, Donald Trump seems to have a new fixation, repeatedly mocking this country and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Katie Simpson spoke with those close to the incoming president about his plans for Canada.
Since the Mar-a-Lago dinner, Donald Trump has made repeated cracks about Canada, joking it could be the 51st state if he tanks the Canadian economy with tariffs, even calling the Prime Minister Governor Justin Trudeau of the great state of Canada.
No one seriously thinks Trump wants to annex Canada, but what's up with this? Why does he keep saying it? We asked someone who's very familiar with Trump's thinking.
He can be mean at times, and I think he's poking at Justin Trudeau and trying to humiliate him. And I think Trump gets a laugh from it. I think it's that simple.
Ambassador John Bolton says Canada needs to play into Trump's ego in order to avoid his tariff threat.
Make the case not why the threat will hurt Canada, but why not invoking the tariffs will help Trump. Forget about U.S.-Canadian relations. That's not the issue for Trump. What makes Donald Trump look good?
Trump's comments are getting some laughs on Capitol Hill.
I wouldn't want a 51st state if they're just going to vote for Democrats.
Why do you think Donald Trump keeps saying that? He said it 4 times now.
I don't know.
Jokes aside, the tariff threat is seen as very real.
Oh, I think he's serious about it, for sure.
Republican Senator Kevin Cramer urged Ottawa to meet Trump's demands to curb the flow of migrants and illegal drugs into the U.S.
We just need to get compliance, and then we'll be fine.
So did Texas Republican Senator James Lankford.
And if there's not solutions, yes, tariffs are in his back pocket.
And Trump's incoming energy czar, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum.
Got to make sure that we're stopping the flow of fentanyl from the Canadian border as well.
Is that a big concern for you?
10% of the illegals are coming from Canada.
Canada is preparing to spend $1 billion to improve border security and plan to telegraph the changes to Trump in the hopes it will satisfy the incoming president. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
Still to come, Ottawa closes a major loophole in its gun buyback program, a long-delayed next step in the crackdown on assault-style weapons in this country. More on that next. CBC News has learned the federal government has closed a major loophole in its gun buyback program. As Jonathan Gatehouse explains, parts that could be used to make homemade guns will now be included.
Yeah, so if you look at this wall here,
this room in Wes Winkle's gun shop has become a sort of museum. Stacks of assault weapons still in their boxes, collecting dust. Paid inventory banned from sale for almost 5 years. But even as the federal government prepares to finally start buying back those guns, there's a new development: the quiet addition of assault weapon parts to the program.
Kind of joke called the Mr. Potato Head of guns because there's so many plug-and-play parts that are involved in it. So if you don't encompass all the parts, really there's no public safety enhancement that you could ever argue.
To restrict access to the very weapons used to commit these horrible crimes.
At a news conference about the buyback plans last Thursday, parts were never mentioned. Now, CBC News has learned the government has since quietly updated its website with a list of components it will be paying for, including bolts, magazines, sights, and grips, along with a wide assortment of barrels.
I think the cost of the program is going to go up dramatically with the inclusion of parts, but also just trying to catalog and get these firearms destroyed. I do expect the administration to be quite expensive.
Back in 2021, the Parliamentary Budget Officer estimated the cost of the buyback at $756 million plus administration, a figure that was already sure to rise as the list of banned weapons has grown. And that estimate never included parts. Gage Hobrick has been tracking the assault weapons ban for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation.
You talk to any firearm owner, they'll probably have just as many firearms accessories as they do have firearms, especially for some of these really expensive guns that are going to be on this buyback list. So all it's going to do is add very much increased cost to taxpayers.
Just how much remains to be seen. Last week, public safety officials said they're still working out the new price tag. A CBC News request to interview Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc about the changes was declined. But even as the expanded buyback finally gets underway, its future is in doubt. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has vowed to cancel what he calls a gun grab if his party wins the next election. Jonathan Gatehouse, CBC News, Toronto.
The Ontario government is taking a harder stand against homeless encampments. This comes as many cities, including Toronto, struggle with crowded shelters. As Ethel Musa explains, Premier Doug Ford wants to impose stiffer penalties against trespassing.
It's scenes like this that Ontario's Premier wants to crack down on.
Enough is enough. This has to stop.
Flanked by mayors from across Ontario, Doug Ford announced the details of new legislation aimed at stiffening penalties for trespassing and public drug use and at dismantling homeless encampments for good.
These encampments are taking over public spaces, with illegal drug use happening out in the open, creating huge safety risks for people and communities.
The new bill will allow police to ticket people using illegal drugs in public, with penalties of up to $10,000 or 6 months in jail.
What he's proposing is really a window dressing on what is effectively a very enforcement-led, very heavy-handed approach. People will leave the encampments and they'll go into alleyways, they'll go into the woods, they'll go into bank vestibules, they'll go into unused garages, they'll go to places that are unsafe for them, and that doesn't solve the underlying problem.
Homelessness and encampments have risen dramatically in Ontario under Ford, and shelters throughout the province are full. Ontario says it's dedicating an additional $75.5 million to expand shelter spaces and build more affordable housing. But advocates say
it's a pittance. It is not enough for an entire province, let alone for one mid-sized municipality. If we're going to put in harsher punishments without building shelter and housing, the only default place for people to go is jails.
Until we come back. Ontario's Liberal leader calls the new bill highly punitive and says it amounts to criminalizing homeless people.
If they were committed to doing something, anything, they would have done it before today.
Ford says he's willing to use the notwithstanding clause to override the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms if courts interfere in municipalities' use of the new provisions to clear encampments. Ethel Musa, CBC News, Toronto.
Quebec and Newfoundland and Labrador's long-standing fight over Churchill Falls may at last be resolved. The two premiers announced a tentative agreement today, drastically reallocating the hydro plant's profits in Newfoundland's favor. As Terry Roberts explains, it's a goal many Newfoundland premiers have longed for.
300 people crowded into the rooms. Former premiers, politicians of all stripes, and business leaders. Media from all over Canada to see this.
This is the 1969 contract, and we are endeavoring to rip it out.
Andrew Fury symbolically ripping up the 1969 Churchill Falls contract. A deal with painful consequences for this province that energized Quebec with vast amounts of nearly free power for 50 years. Well, that deal is ending. 17 years earlier than planned. No more free power, no fixed prices, and a new agreement that will flood money into this province.
Almost $200 billion. $200 billion has transformative power. It and this changes everything.
But that's just the tip of this electric iceberg. This deal includes 4 mega projects, an investment of about $34 billion over the next decade. And here's how it breaks down. Remember Gull Island? At 2,200 megawatts, it's been called the best undeveloped hydro project in North America. Well, it's going ahead. Quebec will pay us $3.5 billion for the right to develop it. NL Hydro will own and operate it. But Quebec will build it, and at $25 billion, it takes all the financial risks. The plan is to commission Gull Island within the next decade, and there will be a new powerhouse built at Churchill Falls. That's nearly $5 billion to make another 1,100 megawatts. Again, Quebec will build it and take all the risks. The existing Churchill Falls station will also be upgraded, and hundreds of kilometers of new transmission lines will be built throughout Labrador and Quebec.
For me, it's a great day also.
So after decades of resisting, why is Quebec changing course on Churchill? Quebec's premier says his province needs more power. Both premiers say the MOU is a win for both provinces and Indigenous groups in Labrador.
I will not allow our province to ever repeat the mistakes of previous mega projects.
This is a big step, an agreement in principle. Now the lawyers get to work, hoping to sign contracts and start construction in 2026. Terry Roberts, CBC News, St. John's.
Darius Madavi is here with our BC-wide weather forecast and a little bit more on that storm.
Yes, that's right. So it's going to move in. We're going to see those winds start to pick up for the island tomorrow. And you can see this is simulated satellite. This is simulated cloud, not what's actually happening right now. But you can see over the next 48 hours or so that storm moving in. Now, with that storm, again, bringing a lot of wind, bringing a lot of rain, also bringing a lot of cloud, which means if you've heard that we're going to be seeing a meteor shower, other places might be, not so much here. You can see this is my astronomy cloud map. You can see a lot of red. That's places where we have at least 80% cloud cover. BC is pretty much out of luck for this one when it peaks tomorrow night, but it will return, it will continue, not at its peak, but will continue through Christmas this year. If we zoom out here, I also want to highlight the fact that if we were going to miss a year, this isn't the worst one because we do have almost a full moon tomorrow night when it is at its peak. That means a lot more light, less chance of seeing a good show of the meteor shower. So if you're going to miss a year, this is probably the one to miss anyway. So that's what I'm telling myself, at least. If we zoom into the south coast, we can talk about that storm coming in, not just interrupting the meteor shower, also probably going to interrupt potentially some travel plans. We're seeing a lot of snow for the mountain passes and for the island, some very strong winds. You can see here at times on the west coast of the island starting to pick up early tomorrow morning, continuing to pick up through the day, first rising for the west coast, east coast of the island and around Victoria. But it will also reach the lower mainland after not too long. Exposed coastal sections probably getting up to 80 kilometers per hour as we get into tomorrow and then especially Saturday. But even a little bit further inland, probably gusting up to 60 kilometers per hour tomorrow and into Saturday once again. You can see Delta, for instance, as usual, a little bit windier than the rest of than other parts of the lower mainland. So getting up, gusting quite high there as well. So gusty winds, also expecting to see some rain, particularly heavy on the west coast of Vancouver Island. You can see that precipitation coming in here. Freezing levels are going to be at around 1,000, 1,200 meters, so that means snow on the mountains, potentially a pretty big dump of snow, especially for some islands, some mountains on the island. If we zoom out, you can also see that precipitation coming across BC. But again, those high amounts are really going to be focused on Vancouver Island, probably our highest accumulations on parts of the island, getting up to around 50 to 60 millimeters in sort of populated areas on the west coast, but higher elevations could be seeing quite a bit more than that as well. Temperatures are going to be bouncing around a little bit over the next few days, but not too much. Coming down in the north is probably the bigger story there in terms of temperatures. Conditions tomorrow, we really start to see that activity on the coast, but also some flurries breaking into the interior. And we've got some activity, but Sunday's looking like a nice little break, albeit cooler.
Okay. Darius, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Christmas has come early for some four-legged critters, big and small. After the break, how one zoo is marking the holidays. You'll want to see this.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and this is your CBC Inbox.
December 6 kicked off CBC's Make the Season Kind, supporting food banks in British Columbia. Thank you to all who have already donated generously and made a difference. The charity drive continues until December 31st. To find out more on how you can give, head to cbc.ca/kindbc. And never miss a special programming series, event, or contest. Subscribe to CBC Vancouver's e-newsletter and keep connected with us.
It's always a mad dash when you realize there are Christmas presents for you.
This zoo in Belgium decided to surprise its residents with some early holiday treats this week. Oh my. Trunks, snouts, hooves, and paws made short work of those tasty gifts. But zoo visitors are also in for some extra fun this season.
Oh my, indeed. They get to feast their eyes on a massive Christmas-themed light show. It includes a giant video projection over the zoo's lake and more than 1 million lights to help kick off the festivities.
You think elephants like Christmas?
That was like a hologram.
I know.
I think so.
I think
so
too.
elephants like everything.
I hope so.
Yeah.
They're very big. Let's hope they do.
Yeah. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, as well as on YouTube and our website, cbc.ca/BC.
And we'll have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. See you then.